Ladies and gents, welcome to UX, and this is Miscellaneous Miss Actaeon. Actaeon? Yeah, Actaeon. By channel Oli Sarcastic production. You know the guy who got turned into a deer and devoured by his own hounds? Shoot, spoilers. Yeah, alright. Another Miscellaneous Miss. I love this series, right? I've been reacting about past year. I've reacted, I think, all of Miscellaneous Myths, or maybe I missed a few, I don't know. But I love the whole Miscellaneous Myth, series from Ovid Sarcastic production. All Greek myths, Egyptian myths, Native American myths. So yeah, that's what it is. I think this is gonna be Greek one, Actaeon probably. But yeah, that's what it is.
The major well-known figures in Greek mythology are famous for all sorts of things. Heracles for his strength, Odysseus for his cunning, Atalanta for her speed and kick-ass Tarzan origin story, Tantalus and Sisyphus for their unique punishments in Hades, Clytemnestra for axe-murdering her husband. The list goes on. Some are good, some are bad, some are pretty cool, and some are frankly kind of embarrassing. I mean, nobody wants to be immortalized as that guy who got squished by a boat, Jason. But in the tumultuous annals of mytho-history, surprisingly few heroes are remembered only for how they died. In fact, I can only think of one, a particularly unlucky dude by the name of Actaeon. Now, Actaeon is a little
right. So, seriously, about Greek myth, one thing I'll notice that it doesn't have to be like, I don't know how to explain this, but for some purpose, right? Lots of time feels like a drama, like, Greeks were bored or something and they just created all these drama stories or something, right? Because, like she said, some of them are just weird, tragic, like somebody just got squashed by a fucking boat or something. Some of them are just scandalous. So it's like Greeks were bored and they just created this shit.
Tricky to talk about. Instead of being referenced in only one story or source, he's one of those guys who seems to have been kind of a meme in ancient Greece. He gets referenced all over the place, but a lot of those references are pretty light on the details, more of a get a load of this guy than a let me tell you a tale. The most complete version of his story is recounted in Ovid's Metamorphoses, but it pops up in a lot of earlier literature as a cautionary tale, typically framed as don't disrespect the gods or you'll end up like Actaeon. Funnily enough, those early references don't actually agree on what Actaeon did wrong. In Euripides' play The Bacchae back in the 400s BCE, Actaeon is cited as a hunter who boasts that he's a better hunter than Artemis, and it's a major no-no to do that in general, so he's devoured by his own hounds. But about 100 years later, the poet Callimachus says in his hymn number 5 that Actaeon accidentally sees Artemis bathing, and since it's a major no-no to behold a deity naked, he's devoured by his own hounds. Then, a little after the turn of the millennium, Pseudo-Apollodorus' Bibliotheca gives us a sprinkling of detail where it specifies that Actaeon is a hunter trained by Chiron who makes the mistake of wooing Semele, girlfriend of Zeus and future mother of Dionysus. This is naturally a bad idea, and at Zeus's command, Actaeon is devoured by his own hounds. Pseudo-Apollodorus does say, however,
Zeus like, how dare you, that's my thing.
This is an unusual telling, and the more popular version of the story is that, like in Callimachus' version, Actaeon's real offense is seeing Artemis bathing, at which point she turns him into a deer, and then he's devoured by his own hounds. The hounds are then confused when they can't find Actaeon and go to Chiron, who figures out the sad story from context clues and carves a statue of Actaeon so the dogs feel better about the whole situation. Now, we're starting to see the faintest hint of a pattern emerging here, but these anecdotal references don't really paint a full picture just yet. For one thing, they don't agree on literally anything other than Actaeon's death. Actaeon is a hunter who pisses off at least one god and is devoured by his own hounds, either explicitly at the god's orders or apparently because that's just a thing that happens. What did he do? Nobody can agree. Which god did he anger? Who's to say? How did he die? Well, okay, that one we've got down. Now, when discussing Actaeon, most people tend to go with Ovid's version, written in the same general 1st century.
Of all the 4 instances, only one has Zeus, other 3 has Artemis in it. So I guess, yeah. I mean, he boasts being a hunter, so I guess the god he would offend, Artemis, kind of makes sense.
CE time frame as Pseudo-Apollodorus is telling, mostly because it is the only version longer than 3 sentences. In Ovid's version, Actaeon is, say it with me now, a hunter. He and his hunter bros have had a long and productive day of hunting, and they're packing it in for the evening and heading home. But unbeknownst to Actaeon, the goddess Artemis happens to have a private grotto nearby where she likes to go and unwind after a long day's hunting with the gals. And unfortunately for Actaeon, he happens to stumble on said private grotto right after Artemis has popped into the water for a nice, refreshing, no-clothes-needed bath. Now, as you may know, Artemis is distinguished in the Olympian pantheon as one of the virgin goddesses whose single status was more than just a personal choice, but also actively sacred. So a dude seeing her naked, accidentally or otherwise, isn't just uncool, it's kinda also sacrilegious. Artemis's nymphs freak out at the intrusion, but Artemis quickly handles the situation by hucking a handful of water at Actaeon and cursing him to silence so he can never tell anyone about this breach of her privacy. The way she does this is by transforming him into a stag, which are famously known for not being able to talk. Actaeon freaks out and bolts into the the woods, but makes the rookie mistake of being shaped like a deer at the time, and every hunting dog in the zip code perks up and bolts after him. Actaeon is eventually run down and devoured by his own hounds. What a twist. So, this is one of those cases where the story has a lot of recurring elements, but not every telling has all of those elements, which sometimes indicates that the
Greek mythology. Who did wrong, who's at fault, doesn't matter. What happened is the only thing that matters, right? So, I mean, he just mistakenly saw Artemis. Who gives a shit, right? He saw Artemis. That's the main point here. So that's it. He's fucked completely.
story underwent an almost organic transformation and evolution over time, starting from a quote-unquote original version before branching and speciating into different versions that each retained individual parts of that original. But it sometimes indicates that the story was always a cluster of other very different stories with only a central point as overlap. To determine which of those things happened here, we need a broader look at the story, one that we can't necessarily find in written works, which we've basically exhausted at this point. Luckily for us, referencing Actaeon was just as popular with artists as it was with poets, and Actaeon shows up in visual media all the time, which can give us a pretty good insight into what elements of the story may have been popular at different times. For instance, earlier versions didn't seem to have Actaeon turning into a deer. In fact, visual representations from the 400s BCE up to the turn of the millennium mostly seem to show Actaeon fully human when he's chased down by his hounds. It's only around the aughts CE that there starts to be an uptick in
let's be honest, him turning into deer feels like an addition, right? Like a remake of the story later on.
representations where Actaeon appears to be partially transformed into a deer during the attack. There's a painting of him in Pompeii from the 1st century BCE where he's got little antlers, but before that, he's almost always human. It's not until the Renaissance, a full 1,000 years after Rome, that the artists start leaning on the Actaeon as a deer imagery super heavily, which is also coincidentally when artists started giving us an eyeful of Artemis bathing, evidently missing the entire point of Ovid's telling in the process. Most of the earlier art also only shows Actaeon as a lone figure being killed, with no sign of which god he might have offended to make that happen. A few pieces of the art from that early Roman era feature a woman, probably Artemis, looking pretty cranky but usually, though not always, fully clothed. In some cases, other gods appear to be present, generally disapproving of Actaeon's vibes. In at least one, it looks like Artemis is chasing him down with a spear while other women are bathing nearby. So looking at all this, it seems like the reason we can't find one specific original telling to treat as the real one is because, as is so often the case, there never was one. The only consistent thing about Actaeon was that he pissed off the gods and was devoured by his own hounds. What exactly?
Yeah. What Artemis should do is put a sign there that between this time of day and these days, never visit here, right? It's just fucked up. The guy's like, oh man, I'm tired. I'm a great hunter. I'm a nice guy. All around just great guy. Everybody talks about him as if he was a great guy. Just walk there and saw Artemis naked. That's it.
Exactly he did, which god or gods were responsible for his death, whether or not he was deer-shaped at the time, changed. It was most commonly related to Artemis, and more commonly because of the bath, but considering the variety of tellings, it probably only got locked into the cultural zeitgeist as Actaeon copped an eyeful of Artemis's secret maidenhood and she decided not to be cool about it because Ovid's version was the easiest to access and Renaissance artists were weird like that.
Yeah, it's gotta be rough dying in such a noteworthy way that it totally eclipses all the other stuff you did. I mean, that's how it goes, right? The stories usually, whatever story, version of the story pleases people usually lives the longest, right? I mean, that's why lots of stories are, somewhat capturing that way, right? I mean, people have created a story in the past that has been capturing, so it lives on as long as it could, right? Because otherwise, if it's not has the spice in it, people will eventually forget it and the story will die out. Depending on the version, the moral shifts between truly the whims of the gods are a terrible thing to face, to don't be creepy and you won't get devoured by your own hounds. Yeah. Ask me about my Actaeon Orion conspiracy theory? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously all mythologies has some kind of a lesson behind it, but when it comes to Greek mythology, they are always, more scandalous, spicy in that way. It's always the most fun one to, I guess, hear about. Alright, well, that was Miscellaneous Myths Actaeon by the channel Ovid Sarcastic Production. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down if you want to react to a specific video, and yeah, I'll see you next time.